Day 6 of the Novena to St Philip, May the 22nd, Philip's cheerfulness. Philip welcomed those who consulted him with singular benignity, and received them, though strangers, with as much affection as if he had been a long time expecting them. When he was called upon to be merry, he was merry. When he was called upon to feel sympathy with the distressed, he was equally ready. Sometimes he left his prayers and went down to sport and banter with young men, and by this sweetness and condescension and playful conversation gained their souls. He could not bear anyone to be downcast or pensive, because spirituality is always injured by it. But when he saw anyone grave and gloomy, he used to say, "Be merry." He had a particular and marked leaning to cheerful persons. At the same time, he was a great enemy to anything like rudeness or foolery, for a buffooning spirit not only does not advance in religion, but roots out even what is already there. One day he restored cheerfulness to Father Francesco Bernardi of the congregation by simply asking him to run with him, saying, "Come now, let us have a run together." His penitents felt such joy at being in his room that they used to say, "Philip's room is not a room, but an earthly paradise." To others, to merely stand at the door of his room without going in was a release from all their troubles. Others recovered their lost peace of mind by simply looking Philip in the face. To dream of him was enough to comfort many. In a word, Philip was a perpetual refreshment to all those who were in perplexity and sadness. No one ever saw Philip melancholy. Those who went to him always found him with a cheerful and smiling countenance, yet mixed with gravity. When he was ill, he did not so much receive as impart consolation. He was never heard to change his voice, as invalids generally do, but spoke in the same sonorous tone as when he was well. Once when the physicians had given him over, he said, with the psalmist, "Paratus sum et non sum turbatus." I am ready and am not troubled. He received extreme unction 4 times, but with the same calm and joyous countenance.
In his 6th letter, Plato provides a path marker for those who would decipher his enigmatic dialogues. Seriousness and playfulness are sisters. That is, Plato regards solemnity and mirth as complementary tempers of soul. We need not always take philosophical writings soberly and at face value. Every author should be allowed his little jokes. For this reason, if for no other, the designation of St Philip Neri's Roman coterie as a nursery of Christian Platonism, and St. Philip himself as the Roman Socrates, is not far from the mark. For St. Philip, too, is known for his jocularity and sense of humor. And St. John Henry Newman, as we have just heard, devoted 1/9 of his preparatory novena for our patronal feast day to Philip's cheerfulness, in Latin, his hilaritas. Part of St. Philip's hilarity clearly stemmed from an allergy to devotional exhibitionism. In the Gospel of the Pharisee and the Publican, the Lord derides the hypocrisy of the Pharisee, who delights in public displays of piety, calculated to capture the admiration of the naive. Much more spiritually sound than the pharisaical charlatan in the Lord's eyes was the poor, unpretentious publican, who hid himself at the back of the synagogue, simply praying, "Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner." Philip was no hypocritical Pharisee. He knew how to keep secrets, and clearly insisted, "Secretum meum mihi," my secret is my own. It is sometimes said that Philip was a natural-born joker, and that his life affords us a lesson in how grace elevates a natural temperament to the supernatural order. Fair enough. Would Philip have had a ready command of jocund provocations and reactions without some natural affinity for cheerfulness and light? But if seriousness and playfulness are really sisters, intrinsically linked, we should be prepared to find something deeper than the display of a personal affinity for laughter when Philip jokes. Philip's early biographers, who would have known the facts on the ground, but did not necessarily understand the depth of his spirituality, do suggest that Philip, unlike the Pharisees, was driven to his play acting by the need to hide the vivid reality of his devotion, and not its unfortunate lack. We hear of Philip reading crude and comical tales to prepare himself for Mass. The sources tell us that the mere anticipation of the august sacrifice he was about to offer would have plunged him into an ecstasy, whereas the joke books would fix him firmly on earth. Most of us have seen pictures of Philip floating away from the altar, presumably on a day when the server had misplaced his arlotto, the joke book of choice. At an audience arranged by a well-meaning friend for some visiting Polish nobles, Philip short-circuited the edifying expectations of the Poles by calling for some juvenile books to be read aloud. "You see what fine books I have read to me," he said. And when the Pope literally offered Philip a cardinal's hat with the intention of raising him to the purple, he politely brushed the hat aside, pretending that the Pope was joking. He would appear in public wearing ridiculous shoes or with half of his beard shaved off. Biographies of St. Philip retail many anecdotes of his practical jokes and odd behavior. Humor is, of course, culturally and historically conditioned, so we might not want to read about the pratfalls of Philip's life in hopes of cooling the ardor of our own hearts, should that be necessary. However, taken with a dose of sympathy and imagination, we discover that Philip represented a significant departure from stereotyped ideas of clerical decorum. What are we to make of this? There is an explanation which is so good that it is attributed to St. Philip himself, all over the internet, on blogs and many memes. Unfortunately, caveat emptor, it is not an authentic saying of St. Philip's, and anyone with an ounce of historical sense will have detected the fraud, or rather, the mistake. Here is this so-called quotation from St. Philip. "We are not saints yet, but we too should beware. Uprightness and virtue do have their rewards in self-respect and in respect from others, and it is easy to find ourselves aiming for the result rather than the cause. Let us aim for joy rather than respectability. Let us make fools of ourselves from time to time, and thus see ourselves for a moment as the all-wise God sees us." Part of the giveaway that this is not an authentic saying is its sermonic format. We are not saints yet, but we too should beware. Who is this we? We, the hearers of this saint's life, are not saints like Philip, but we, the hearers who aspire to sanctity, should beware. The reason we should beware is valid enough, but is expressed in a way that is more self-reflexive and psychological than one would expect from a 16th century cleric. To avoid the complacency of enjoying a reputation for respectability, let us aim for joy rather than respectability. This, too, is not altogether bad counsel, but it is hard to think anyone learned in classical philosophy and theology would regard either respectability or joy as ultimate ends of choice. Like pleasure, respectability and cheerfulness may accompany human excellence, but attempting to make them goals of human action would be self-defeating. The final hint that this quotation has been misattributed to St. Philip is the twofold "let us" exhortation that signals a preacher is approaching the end of his homily. Let us aim for joy. Let us make fools of ourselves. With a little bit of ingenuity, you can find the original version of this life of St. Philip on the internet, and you will see that it is just as I have said. The migration of a homilist's conclusion to a meme purported to illustrate Philip's own words represents a failure to understand what the rules of punctuation signify. Nonetheless, Philip did regard joy as an important instrument in the arsenal of a spiritual combatant. St. John Paul II remarked, "The loving figure of the saint of joy even today still maintains intact that irresistible charm that he exercised on all those who drew near him to learn to know and experience the authentic sources of Christian joy." Leafing through the biography of St. Philip, in fact, one is surprised and fascinated by the cheerful and relaxed method he used to educate, supporting each person with fraternal generosity and patience. Philip himself explained in his Maxims and Counsels, "Cheerfulness strengthens the heart and makes us persevere in a good life. Therefore, the servant of God ought always to be in good spirits. Charity and cheerfulness, or charity and humility, should be our motto." Or, even more succinctly, a joyful heart is more easily made perfect than a downcast one. And from the other side, as it were, he who continues in anger, strife, and a bitter spirit has a taste of the air of hell. Our enemy, the devil, who fights with us in order to vanquish us, seeks to disunite us in our houses and to breed quarrels, dislikes, contests, and rivalries, because while we are fighting with each other, he comes and conquers us and makes us more securely his own. Philip practiced what he preached. The poet Phyllis McGinley, in her charming book, Saint Watching, said that Philip Neri was the merriest man alive during the turbulent period of church history, the Protestant Revolt. However, we should not think that this was because he was a blind and bumbling Italian cleric, nestled in the shadows of the Vatican and incapable of recognizing the seriousness of the disputes then lacerating the church. According to the theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar, the saints are never the kind of killjoy spinster aunts who go in for fault-finding and lack all sense of humor. For humor is a mysterious but unmistakable charism inseparable from Catholic faith. As Balthasar notes, the Catholic can be pliable, flexible, yielding, because his firmness is not based on himself and his own opinion, but on God. The dogmatism of those who cannot let go of their own selves is the opposite of the courage of those who opt for the Catholicity of truth, focusing their existence on the concrete Christ. Balthasar criticizes, in the spirit of St Philip Neri, the watchwords of the Reformation: faith alone, Scripture alone, grace alone, glory to God alone. Ironically, the preoccupations of the Protestant champions of the divine sovereignty entail an ultimate failure to acknowledge God's supreme power. In Balthasar's gently humorous formulation, they are forbidding God to be anything other than himself. Man, for instance, if he should so wish, to be anywhere else but in heaven. In short, heresy, as Balthasar characterizes it, is a part claiming to be the whole. And humor, we might say, is the balance that permits the whole to intimate itself, even in the fragmentary. At least some of Philip's biographers make heavy weather of the claim that Philip's playfulness served as a method of concealing his sanctity. But if Balthasar is correct to say that humor is intrinsic to holiness, Philip's cheerfulness may have been a little joke that God played on the somber dogmatists of Philip's day, revealing rather than concealing what he truly was. On the other hand, we might consider a suggestion made by the jolly journalist G.K. Chesterton. At the end of his book Orthodoxy, Chesterton confesses, "The Stoics, ancient and modern, were proud of concealing their tears. He never concealed his tears. He showed them plainly on his open face at any daily sight, such as the far sight of his native city. Yet he concealed something. Solemn supermen and imperial diplomatists are proud of restraining their anger. He never restrained his anger. He flung furniture down the front steps of the temple and asked men how they expected to escape the damnation of hell. Yet he restrained something. I say it with reverence. There was in that shattering personality a thread that must be called shyness. There was something that he hid from all men when he went up a mountain to pray. There was something that he covered constantly by abrupt silence or imperious isolation. There was some one thing that was too great for God to show us when he walked upon our earth. And I have sometimes fancied that it was his mirth. Is this God's little joke on Philip, or Philip's little joke on God? Secretum meum mihi, my secret is my own. But what if Philip was never any good at keeping secrets? What if he has tripped on the veil meant to cloak the divine mirth and afforded us the briefest of glimpses of God's hidden cheer?
Philip, my glorious advocate, who didst ever follow the precepts and example of the Apostle St. Paul, in rejoicing always in all things, gain for me the grace of perfect resignation to God's will, of indifference to matters of this world, and a constant sight of heaven, so that I may never be disappointed at the divine providences, never desponding, never sad, never fretful, that my countenance may always be open and cheerful, and my words kind and pleasant, as becomes those who in whatever state of life they are, have the greatest of all goods, the favour of God and the prospect of eternal bliss.